Welcome to this webinar for onboarding new Economic Development District Executive Directors. This is the second in a series of webinars produced by the NATO Research Foundation with financial support from the U.S. Economic Development Administration. This webinar series is an ongoing effort to try to equip the next generation of leaders for economic development districts across our country. The NATO Research Foundation has recently produced a new onboarding toolkit that I would encourage you to get a copy of so you can use that as you navigate forward in your efforts to be the new leader of an economic development district. This second of three webinars is going to be focused today primarily on financial management and operations within an economic development district. My name is Steve Etcher, and I'm delighted to be your host and presenter today. I'm the manager at Marks Nelson Advisors, LLC. This is a Kansas City-based firm. But within our practice area, we get the opportunity to work with many community and economic development organizations to provide consulting to them to help them leverage their abilities to enhance their impact. Prior to becoming part of Marks Nelson, I had the opportunity to serve for more than 20 years as the director of a regional development organization, and I'm delighted to share those experiences with you. One of the most daunting areas facing new executive directors for economic development districts is to getting a deep understanding and full grasp of the financial impacts and management of an economic development district. It is not your typical organization, and as such, the financial management practices and policies are not typical as well. There's a number of things that you need to be asking yourself as the new director, so make sure you have a clear understanding of it, because at the end of the day, you as the director are responsible for the entire organization, which includes the organization's financial performance. But the first thing you need to understand as you're taking on this new role as a director of an economic development district is what staff is doing what. Who is responsible for what elements of your financial management. Review to make sure that those staff that are involved, there's proper sets of checks and balances to ensure financial integrity. You need to get a copy of and look objectively at your policies and processes to make sure that the systems are in place to make sure you are safeguarding the public funds that you've been entrusted to. Are you, and have you historically as an organization been wise stewards of those funds? And is your policies really geared to protect that? You need to understand your financial management software. Is it really sufficient for the task? Does it do what you need it to do? And if it does, is it reasonably priced for the organization? And does it adequately protect the information that you have within your financial systems? Let me reiterate, your financial management software is an important tool within the economic development district, but it does not replace your responsibility for overseeing and ensuring the financial integrity of the organization. Make sure that your software does for you what you need it to do. You need to understand your organization's budget. Get a copy of your current budget and its performance. Understand the fiscal periods on which the organization actually operates. They all are varied. We have seen a number of organizations that are calendar year basis. Others have a fiscal year that begins in July. Some may begin in October. So understand what the time frame is for your budget period so you can properly report and understand your financial performance. You also need to, as you look at that budget, get a grasp on your budget categories. What are those major ticket items within the budget that really will shape the future and may have shaped the past of the organization? What are fixed costs? What are indirect costs? What are the operating costs? What kind of debt service has the organization been paying, etc.? You need to make sure you have a clear understanding of audit reports that have been prepared and auditors that are engaged to act on behalf of your organization. Make sure you can answer the question of who does the audit? When was the last audit performed? When is the next audit scheduled to be conducted? And most importantly, I know it's really exciting reading, but you need to read the auditor's report to make sure you understand their recommendations, their findings that are included within that audit report. You need to understand if your organization has an indirect cost plan. If you have one, you need to review it to make sure it really does what it's supposed to be doing. And you may not have one, but you may need to ask yourself, do we need to have one to properly capture those indirect costs in an appropriate manner? You need to understand your financial reporting systems. What needs reported to whom and when? What is the best format for a financial report to the organization? When do you need to produce these reports and who receives those reports? As a new director working with the board of directors, let me encourage you to provide as much valuable information to your board as you can, but do not drown them with volumes of financial data that they don't want, nor do they understand. Part of your financial management organization is also to make sure you have a clear understanding of your insurance coverage. Do you have all the policies in place that you need in today's marketplace? Are you protected for liability? Are you protected for workers' compensation? Are your officers and directors covered under fiduciary policies? Do you have property and casualty insurance on those assets that you own and or lease? So make sure you have a good inventory of your insurance policies. You need to understand your revenue sources. This is critical as you look at growing an organization and running an organization. It takes financial resources. You need to understand what your primary sources of funding are, so you can not only manage those, but you can grow and enhance and build upon those. If a lot of your revenue or some of your revenue comes from a membership or a tax base, you need to understand those calculations. How are those made so you can predict what the future revenue could potentially be? And again, lastly, understand your key expenses. Understand what your major categories of expenses are, knowing that your budget is likely largely driven by staff costs and staff-related costs. You are a professional development organization. As such, staff will oftentimes be your largest expense. So when you approach the subject matter of financial management of the organization, these are the 10 things that I would put top on my list as a new director. Some best practices for you as you embark on this position of leading an organization. Number one, adopt an annual operating budget. This is something that you and your staff should prepare in consultation with your board leaderships. But once that budget is drafted, it should be presented to your board, and those board members should ratify that through an adoption process. I would encourage you to make a priority to accumulate financial reserves that will give you the capacity to take on new projects and initiatives into the future, as well as withstand any downturns that you cannot predict at today's market. You need to prioritize eliminating any indebtedness, except potentially if you own your building or you've got a large mortgage on the space that you're currently occupying. Eliminate all of their indebtedness, because it will be an anchor that holds you back from sailing free. You need to know how your organization's budget is trending. Are our revenues escalating? Are they declining? Are our expenses escalating or declining? My guess, with this recent inflationary period, you're seeing a lot of things are trending upwards, and maybe not necessarily in a good way. But you as the leader need to understand those potential trends. If you do not have one, you need to develop a financial procedures manual. I believe this is such an important tool because it, in essence, will serve as a contract, an agreement between you and your financial management staff that tells them when this happens, these are the things that must be done. So get a financial procedures manual in place. If you don't have one, create one. If you don't want to create one, reach out to a colleague and get a copy and utilize theirs and make it your own. Make sure you are contracted for an annual independent financial audit. This is important because it gives confidence to not only your board, but also the constituents that you serve, that you are actually responsible with the money that you've been entrusted. You need to provide financial monthly statements to your board of directors. Don't just send them an update once a year. Don't give them a financial report once a quarter. If your board is truly engaged, and they need to be truly engaged, they need to understand monthly how the organization is performing. And this can be a very concise summary report, but it's important that you do that. Probably one of the most important things you can do, and this is even more difficult in the era of everything's digital, but you need to have multiple authorities or multiple signatures on all checks. So make sure there's proper checks and balances. Make sure there's number of eyes and hands touching funds that are being dispersed from your organization. Some other keys to help you manage the organization's finances better. Number one, hire trustworthy, competent, and experienced staff. If the staff's already there, make sure they are competent in what they do. Make sure that you can trust them. If not, there may be a change that's necessary within the organization. You as a director need to oversee the financial staff directly. They should report to you. The financial performance of an organization is the one thing that seems to cause the greatest concern and heartache for a number of organizations. That's why I think it's so important that your financial staff reports directly to you so you have a clear understanding of what's going on. Again, make sure you have fidelity insurance in place in the event that something erroneous happens, something happens in error or fraudulently. Make sure that you're protected through insurance. Please separate your duties in the financial realm as much as possible. And I know for some of the smaller organizations across the country, this becomes a bit more of a challenge. But to whatever degree you could possibly do it, please separate your financial duties so there's not just one person handling everything. You absolutely do not want the same person receiving the monies that spends the money. You need other people to understand what's going on. As a new director, if you are not 100% confident in your financial aptitude, go get some training. Go to a community college, take an online course, figure out what you can do to better make yourself equipped to not only understand, but to communicate the financial performance of the organization. Again, have an audit done. Meet with the auditor, get their opinion on the financial practices of the organization. As I've met with many different organizations across the country, I find it surprisingly that a lot of directors leave the meeting with the auditor to the financial management staff. As the director, I believe it's important that you sit on that exit conference with the auditor, you get his opinion on how the organization is performing. And don't just think of financial management as how do we report what has happened to the organization. You need to be thinking about how does our financial abilities help us or hinder us to achieve what we're trying to do within our region as an organization. So how do you communicate financial information to your board of directors? Again, I would go back to say this should be something that's very unique to your own management style and very unique to what your board wants to see, but ask them what they want to see. But some things that I think are very, very important as you start on this process. Number one, be transparent at all times. If something goes wrong, don't hide it. Let them know what's going on. Let them know how you're resolving that situation. Be direct at all times. I have listened in on a number of financial reports that just talk in circles because they don't either understand or they don't want people to understand what the information is they're communicating. Be truthful. Do not use numbers to paint the wrong picture. If things are trending the wrong direction and the numbers show that, admit that. Be truthful about it. When you're talking with your board of directors, please do not use jargon or technical language that they have no idea what you're talking about. Make sure you bring it down to a level of complete understanding for your board. The best way to do this, I believe, is using dashboards. Use graphs and summary reports that will present this data to them in a meaningful way. And as you do that, be consistent with that financial reporting. Use the same effective format each meeting so you're creating familiarity with your financial statements. I think so much harm is done when every financial statement looks a little bit different. So you're not comparing apples to apples. You may not even be comparing apples to oranges. It's fruits versus vegetables if you look at some of the reports that leaders produce for their board of directors. And it's also important to create a narrative around your financial reports and tie that budget and your financial activity back to your organization's purpose, mission, and focus. Let them know that this is an investment that's producing a result. It's not just an expense. Remember, the financial statements are a snapshot of a specific period of time alone. So make sure you understand the trend leading up to that period and that you project the trend leading away from that period so you can understand those long-term implications. If you provide financial statements and your board meets on a monthly basis, please send those financial statements in advance of the meeting to allow the members enough time to review, understand what's being presented, and have intelligent questions to ask you. Whether or not they open it and read that in advance of the meeting is on them. But I believe as a director, you have a responsibility to get that information to them in a timely manner so they can review it in advance of the meeting. If your board members don't understand your financial management process, if they don't understand the implications of your programs, offer training to your board members to make sure they get a good understanding of the organization's structure and performance. For those that's relatively new to this, and so a lot of directors would probably say financial management is their Achilles heel. It's the weakest part of their skill sets. They're really good at planning, they're really good at communicating, they're really good at project management, but financial management can be very, very difficult. So when dealing with new directors who may not be confident in their financial aptitude, I always try to break it down into really a couple of buckets. And the first is what you as a director needs to understand. You need to understand your cash inflow and outflows. This is different than a report on your revenues and expenses. This is different than your income statement. This is basically you having an understanding what amount of money is coming in, when is it coming in, and what is it going to, and when is it being dispersed. You as a director need to understand your budget, but you also need to have an awareness that that budget is merely a blueprint. It is a plan for the future. And as such, those plans can be adjusted as necessary throughout a fiscal period. You need to understand financial statements are strictly historical. They are only reporting what happened in the past. But financial projections are going to be critical to addressing your current and future needs as an organization. Now, this is different than what your board needs to know. And it's important that you distinguish between the two. Your board needs to understand what resources the organization has. They need to understand, at least in general terms, what are the source of those funds so they can understand what they can then do with those funds. And they need to understand how the organization is performing. And if you can keep the financial management within these two buckets, it'll help you navigate this unfamiliar territory just a little bit easier. So when we talk about financial statements, there's really just a few financial statements you need to be aware of. The first is a balance sheet. These are terms that you're likely to hear if you take an Accounting 101 course or you sit in on any type of organizational financial reporting webinar. The balance sheet reports your financial status. It shows what you have and what you owe at a specific point in time. It doesn't cover a period of time. It is a date-specific report. And it's usually prepared the last day of an accounting period. For instance, it will show you your cash on hand at the end of a month. It will show you the amount of outstanding debt obligations you have at the end of a reporting period as well. The second financial statement you need to have an awareness of is your income statement. This is your financial performance report. This will tell you how the organization performed during a specific period of time. That can be for an entire 12-month fiscal period. It can be for a fiscal quarter. It can be for the current month. But an income statement just produces the performance activities for that specified period. And the third most important statement probably is your statement of cash flows. It will explain your change in cash position during a specific period. It will identify the sources of the inflows of cash, and it will identify the uses or outflows of those cash. And this element, this report becomes incredibly important as you near payday. You need to make sure you have sufficient cash resources to meet your financial obligations. And if you can't, then it will help you anticipate your need to go out and secure cash for those key periods. As we move beyond financial management, it's also important to understand the programs that an organization is delivering. So you may have inherited a number of programs or a few programs within the organization when you took over. But as you look at those programs, you need to understand what is the objective of that program? What are we really trying to achieve? What is the budget related to that program? What are the revenues that it's producing? What are the costs that it's incurring? You need to understand who are the key staff that are performing the activities within that engagement, within those specific programs. And you also need to understand what are those contract terms or program terms. Is this a program that you've had into perpetuity and likely will have forever? Is this a one-year contract? Is it a multi-year contract that can be renewable based on performance? You need to understand that because it's these programs that typically provide the day-to-day activities for the organization to pursue. And you also need, as a new director, to understand its current status. Are you on schedule? Are you ahead of schedule? Are you in arrears? What is the quality of that report? What is the quality of those program activities? Make sure you have a clear understanding of the objective all the way down through the status of the various programs that you have. As a director, you also need to spend an enormous amount of time understanding your staffing capabilities. Your staff can be your greatest asset, but poorly managed or poorly hired, they can also be an incredible liability for your organization. As a director, you need to understand your staff capacity, their past performance, as well as their passions and pursuits. Understand what the job duties are assigned to each staff member. Understand what programs and projects they're currently working on. You need to understand how long they've been with the organization. If they've been there for a sufficient period of time, They may be an incredible source of organizational intelligence for you. Review and see what certifications they have. What training have they undergone? What has been their background? What has been their educational history? And how can you use that then to not only service the existing programs you have within the organization, but potentially grow and expand them? I would encourage you to meet with your staff so you understand what their career goals and aspirations are. So you can then take what their passions are and use that to your advantage within the organization and leverage that to help you grow. I think it's also important to understand prior performance evaluations. I wouldn't look at those as, aha, this is where the staff member has not done well, but really go back and review their prior performance evaluation to understand the goals that they have for themselves within these positions. That will help you as a new director really maximize the inputs from your staff. Another area that is becoming increasingly challenging for new directors to embrace is the implementation of technologies. Understanding how the organization leverages technology to not only perform what they do, but also excel at what they do. You need to understand who is responsible for managing your IT services. Is this something that is being done internally with staff that you've hired to do? Do you outsource this to a firm that's providing it on your behalf? When I'm talking about IT services, I'm talking about who maintains your servers, who maintains your computers, who's responsible for safeguarding your data. And if you're using a party outside of the staffing itself, are they insured in case something does go wrong? But you also need to make sure, if it's being done by your staff, that you have proper cyber insurance to catch and manage anything that may happen in the IT sphere. You need to understand if your information is stored on a server, or if it's cloud-based, or if it's neither. Hopefully it's not neither. It's incredibly efficient to have your members, staff members, being able to access all the same information. If that can be done on a server-based or a cloud-based, you're going to create enormous efficiencies within the organization. Plus, if you have a central point for all of that information, it's going to be much easier to back it up. And not only just back it up, but also secure it. You may be dealing with individual information, everything from social security numbers within your payroll system to maybe some client information for constituents you're serving. That data needs to be properly secured. And in today's hacking environment, you can never be too safe with securing data. So make sure that you are properly securing all the data that you have. You need to make sure you have firewalls in place, that you have protocols in place to make sure you have license agreements for all the softwares you are running. But you also need to know who has knowledge of all of that. Is this one staff member within your organization, or is this the firm that you're outsourcing information to? You need to understand as the director where that information is stored. Who assigns email addresses to the organization? Simple questions like that can be very difficult for a new director. But you also need to understand what technology does the organization utilize. Are you doing GIS? Are you using modeling software? There's a variety of tools out there that make your job so much more efficient. You need to understand not only what you're using, but who's using it and what is the cost of that. You probably should also develop an inventory of your existing technologies. What is the age of the systems you're using? What condition are they in? Are they laptops? Are they iPads? Are they server monitors? Get a clear understanding of your inventory of technology. While we're talking about technology, it's important to talk about cell phones. Most organizations have transitioned to 100% cell phone usage. So understand, what is the policy regarding cell phone use? Is it a company-provided cell phone, or is it staff-provided cell phone? What of that information should be available or could be available to public records if a request is made? And are there systems in place, are the procedures in place for constantly training staff on the proper use of email, how to be aware of spamming attempts and malware attempts and phishing attempts? Make sure you have systems in place to make sure your staff can best use the technologies available to them. And last but not least, as you kind of come in and embrace this organization, the approach that I think you really want to make sure you have a clear understanding on is the organizational chart. Who does what to whom, who reports to whom. Obviously, you as the new director, your managers report to you, the staff typically report to the managers, but get yourself an organizational chart that includes everybody within the organization, so you have a real clear mind of who's responsible and who's accountable to whom. You need to have an evaluation of what is the organization culture. Is it really the culture that you want to create? Is it conducive to, professionalism? Is it conducive to professional growth? or is it toxic? Is it an asset or is it an impediment to your organization? Make that evaluation, and when and necessary, make the appropriate changes. I think it's also important as a new director that you understand the organization's history, whether that be a very shiny history or a very dimmed history. You need to take a look at that. Understand the successes of the organization. Those are things that you can build on. Understand the failures. Where has the organization faltered in the past that you want to make sure you avoid those missteps in the future? Understand the challenges it's facing the organization right now, and understand the impacts that you're making from the work that you spend your days performing. You need to see if your organization has a strategic action plan. I'm a firm believer in creating organizational strategic action plans to make sure you stay focused on the mission, to make sure you stay focused on the purpose of what you're trying to do. So ask yourself, do you have one? Does it exist? When was it developed? If it was developed, when was it updated? And if not, begin to make headway into that area. Your action plan should be actionable. It should be understood by all that's responsible performing it. And it should require levels of accountability and responsibility. So focus on the organizational strategic plan to make sure all of your team is moving in the right direction and everybody is supporting each other in their growth and development. And last but certainly not least, understand the organization basics. What are the work days? What are the normal hours of work? What is the company policy on remote work? Who keeps the keys? Who issues keys? Where's the supply closet? How do you use the copier? Some basic things that you as a director will just need to equip yourself with information in a very short period of time as you endeavor on this wonderful opportunity to become a director of an economic development district, making a huge impact on the region that you are served. I would encourage you, if you have questions about any of these elements as you take on this new role of a director, as an executive director, please feel free to reach out to me. My contact information is there. Scan the QR code or reach out to the Native Research Foundation, who would be happy to provide you additional training resources to make sure you have high success as a new director of an economic development district. Thank you for participating in this webinar.